On the grim expanse of Manor Farm, the animals lived out their days in weary obedience under the command of Mr. Jones, a man as indifferent as he was cruel. The animals knew little more than daily toil, hunger and mistreatment, with freedom and comfort feeling as distant as a long-forgotten dream. Jones was a man who saw them only as tools or commodities. Day after day, he staggered through the farm, reeking of alcohol, his careless steps trampling the tender earth beneath his feet. When he shouted orders or cracked his whip, it seemed that the very air grew heavier with each sharp, stinging sound. Under his neglectful hand, Manor Farm was a place where despair hung thick, like a gray fog that never lifted. Yet, in the midst of this sorrowful existence, one voice offered something different, something that felt like hope. That voice belonged to Old Major, an aging pig whose stature commanded the respect of every creature on the farm. With his bristling white mane and eyes that seemed to hold countless stories, Old Major had lived through the farm's many seasons, watching as countless animals came and went, often sent off to their doom when they had outlived their usefulness. As he grew older, he had begun to see through the bleakness that surrounded them, recognizing the cruel futility of their lives. The younger animals looked up to him, not only as a respected elder, but as the closest thing they had to a leader or guide. One chilly, star-strewn evening, Old Major felt the weight of his years more acutely than ever. The creeping cold settled into his bones, making each breath feel like a labor in itself. Yet, a strange energy stirred within him, a resolve that he could not ignore. In his heart, he knew that his days were drawing to an end, and he felt a fierce, almost desperate need to leave something behind. A message that might outlast him and perhaps, in some small way, reshape the fate of those he would leave behind. Driven by this final purpose, Old Major summoned the animals to a secret meeting in the barn. He wanted all of them to hear him, to feel as he did the urgency of change. As he waited for the others to gather, he saw each face arrive with a mixture of curiosity and hope, perhaps sensing that this was no ordinary assembly. The barn was packed, animals of all shapes and sizes huddled together, brimming with a sense of anticipation that was almost palpable. There was Boxer, the massive cart horse whose simple loyalty and hard work were known to all, and Clover, the gentle mare who had raised so many of the young animals like her own. The younger animals, the hens and sheep, too young to fully understand what life had in store for them, crowded in eagerly, their wide eyes fixed on Old Major. When at last silence fell, Old Major began to speak. His voice warm, yet weighted with the sorrow of countless years. His words were not rushed, for he wanted each one to sink into their hearts, to stir within them a new understanding of their lives. He spoke of his dreams, a life where no animal was bound by human chains, where no creature would ever again suffer the whip or the noose.
My friends,
he began, his voice trembling slightly with the weight of his message.
I have lived long on this earth, and in all my years I have never known the joy of true freedom. Every waking moment has been spent toiling under the yoke of human greed. Our lives are not ours. We exist only to serve men, to labor and sweat until our very bones give out. And when we are no longer of use, we are cast aside like empty husks. I see it in all your faces, the fear, the weariness. This is not the life that we were born to live.
A quiet murmur rippled through the barn. The animals, even the younger ones, who had not fully grasped the reality of their existence, felt a stirring within them. It was as if Old Major's words had unlocked something hidden in the depths of their hearts, a recognition of the unfairness they had always known but never dared to question. Old Major paused, his gaze sweeping over them, his eyes resting on the old and the young alike.
The life of an animal is nothing but misery and slavery. That is the plain truth. But what if it did not have to be this way? What if we, as animals, could stand together and cast off the chains that bind us? Imagine a life where every blade of grass was ours, where every drop of water was not a begrudged sip, but a gift for the life we bear within us. Imagine, my friends, a world where each of us was valued not for our flesh or our milk or our eggs, but simply for the life we bear within us.
As he spoke, the animals listened with rapt attention. Even the dullest among them sensed the power of his vision. It was as though a veil had been lifted, revealing a glimmer of a world they had never dared to dream of. Many of the animals had grown up hearing only the crack of Jones's whip and his slurred, angry shouts. Yet here was a dream where animals would live as equals, where they would control their own destinies.
In my youth,
Old Major continued, his voice now more urgent.
I learned a song. It was passed down through generations, sung by animals long before us, animals who dreamed, as I do, of a life without fear. I want to share this song with you, a song that tells of a brighter future, a world where beasts of England will be free.
With a voice that was both fierce and tender, Old Major began to sing. The tune was haunting, filled with the sadness of those who had come before, but also with the hope of those yet to come. Beasts of England, beasts of Ireland, beasts of every land and clime. As the melody filled the barn, the animals listened, spellbound. Slowly they began to join in, their voices rising together in harmony. Each note felt like a promise, a bond that united them all in shared purpose. For the first time, they looked around and saw not mere companions in labor, but comrades, brothers and sisters bound by a common struggle. As the song rose to a crescendo, the animals felt a warmth kindling inside them, a fire that had been smothered for too long by fear and resignation. When the song finally faded, Old Major's voice softened, and he looked out over the gathering with something akin to pride.
Remember this moment, my friends.
He said, his voice growing frail once more.
Remember this song. The dream I have shared with you tonight must live on, even if I am not here to see it. I believe with all my heart that one day, animals will walk the earth as free beings. But to reach that day, you must be brave. You must stand together.
The animals sat in silence, feeling the enormity of Old Major's vision settle over them like a heavy cloak. No one moved, each animal lost in the dream he had painted, even the indifferent creatures, the hens, the sheep, found themselves caught up in the vision of freedom. It was as though he had planted a seed deep within them, one that would grow in time, nourished by the shared memories of this night. In the days that followed, the farm continued as usual. Jones drank, the animals toiled, and the familiar hardships persisted. But something had shifted, something intangible yet undeniable. When they passed each other in the fields or at the watering trough, they exchanged glances that held the faintest trace of recognition and hope. A few days after the meeting, old Major passed away in his sleep. His absence left a hollow feeling in their hearts, but the words he had spoken, the song he had sung, they were burned into their memories. In that darkened barn on that cold night, he had given them a gift no whip could tear away. The promise of something more. After old Major's death, a hush fell over Manor Farm, a kind of silent mourning that none of the animals had ever known. The wise old boar had been more than just a voice of reason. He had been a dreamer, and through his dream, he had planted a small spark in each of them, a spark that now lay buried under grief, but had not been extinguished. Days passed, and slowly the animals began to feel the weight of his vision, a sense that something precious had been entrusted to them. They had shared a glimpse of something beyond the dreary routine of their lives, a glimmer of hope they could not ignore. 3 pigs emerged as leaders in the wake of old Major's death, carrying forward his vision and guiding the animals toward the elusive idea of freedom. Napoleon, Snowball, and Squealer were not just any pigs. They were intelligent, resourceful, and above all, they seemed to embody old Major's words in ways that the others did not. Each had their own strengths. Napoleon was quiet but watchful, a boar with a steady, determined air. Snowball was vivacious and articulate, inspiring the animals with his speeches and his ideas. Squealer, with his silver tongue, could make even the most confusing ideas seem clear and understandable. It was these 3 pigs who decided that old Major's vision needed structure. His dream needed a framework, something concrete that would guide the animals and ensure they stayed true to the ideals of freedom and equality. After many late-night discussions in the shadowy corners of the barn, they formulated an ideology they called animalism. For the animals of Manor Farm, it was a strange and wondrous thing, a philosophy designed not by humans, but by themselves, to benefit themselves. But spreading the idea of animalism wasn't easy. Not every animal grasped the vision as eagerly as the pigs had hoped. There was Molly, a pretty white mare with a love for ribbons and sugar, who struggled to understand the allure of rebellion. She would listen to Napoleon's words with a vague, distracted smile, her mind wandering back to the pampered days when Mr. Jones had rewarded her with sweet treats. "Will there be sugar after the rebellion?" she asked one day, her eyes bright with hope. Snowball and Napoleon exchanged weary glances. They tried to explain that ribbons and sugar were tokens of human exploitation, and in a society built on equality, such luxuries would no longer exist. But Molly's gaze only grew dull, her head drooping as she pondered a world without her precious adornments. Then there was Moses, the old raven, who perched on the fence posts and preached about Sugar Candy Mountain, a magical land beyond the clouds where all animals would go when they died. To the tired, weary animals, Moses's tales were both a comfort and a distraction, offering them hope, but also weakening their resolve. While the pigs tried to encourage the animals to focus on building a better life in the here and now, Moses's tales lured them into a passive acceptance of their suffering. Yet Moses spoke with such conviction that many couldn't help but listen, dreaming of a paradise they might one day reach. Nevertheless, as the pigs worked tirelessly to promote animalism, a quiet understanding began to take root in the hearts of the animals. They saw that the pigs weren't simply preaching, they were working alongside them, devoting themselves wholeheartedly to this new ideology. Slowly, even the most reluctant animals felt the weight of old Major's dream. It was as though the spirit of the old boar still lingered among them, urging them forward, calling them to rise against the yoke of human oppression. Days turned into weeks, and the atmosphere on Manor Farm grew tense. Jones's drinking had worsened, and he paid little attention to the farm. Food became scarcer, and the animals grew hungrier, the gnawing in their stomachs only sharpening their resentment toward the farmer who treated them as little more than tools. It was in this volatile, brittle air that the spark finally ignited. One late summer evening, Jones and his men stumbled back from town, reeking of alcohol, their laughter harsh and careless. The animals watched from their pens as the men slouched into the farmhouse, leaving the feed bins empty and the water troughs dry. The pang of hunger became unbearable, and an unspoken understanding passed among them. This was a night like no other, a moment waiting to be seized. In the dim light of dawn, the animals gathered in silence, their eyes reflecting a fierce determination. At first they hesitated, unsure who would make the first move. Then, driven by hunger and fury, a young cow broke through the barn door, followed by the sheep and pigs. One by one, the animals surged forward, their hooves thundering against the ground, their voices raised in an urgent, wordless cry, half awake and bewildered, only to be met with a sea of defiance. His usual threats and shouts had no effect. The animals, united by a shared rage, surged at him and his men, their combined strength and numbers making them unstoppable. Even the gentler creatures, the hens, the ducks, found themselves filled with a newfound courage, pecking and fluttering in a frenzied dance of rebellion. Within minutes, Jones and his workers were overwhelmed, their authority crumbling under the weight of the animals' collective will. The humans fled, chased off the farm by the relentless force of their own neglected charges. The animals stopped only when they reached the fence at the edge of the property, watching as Jones and his men disappeared down the road, leaving nothing but a trail of dust behind them. For a long moment, silence blanketed the farm, broken only by the animals' heavy breathing and the soft rustle of leaves in the dawn light. They had done it. Against all odds, they had cast off the yoke of human rule. The realization washed over them slowly, a warm, thrilling sensation that brought tears to the eyes of even the sternest among them. Snowball, eyes bright and voice trembling, declared.
We are free.
His words echoed through the farm, and a cheer rose from the gathered animals. They were no longer the property of Mr. Jones. They were the masters of their own fate. In a moment of collective euphoria, they embraced one another, united in joy and disbelief. But as the sun began to rise, illuminating the farm with a soft, golden light, the animals' joy turned to purpose. They gathered outside the barn, and Snowball, Napoleon, and Squealer led them to the large barn wall, where they declared that Manor Farm would be no more. In its place, they would create a new society, a place where each animal could live in dignity, free from the tyranny of humans. They christened it Animal Farm, a name that symbolized their new society, a place where each animal could live in dignity, free from the tyranny of humans. They christened it Animal Farm, a name that soon found a place on the island. With trembling hands and hearts filled with purpose, they began to inscribe the 7 commandments of animalism on a wall, commandments that would serve as the foundation of their new world. Snowball took a brush in his mouth and painted each word with care, the letters large and bold, so that every creature could see them, could live by them. The commandments read as follows.
1. Whatever goes upon 2 legs is an enemy. 2. Whatever goes upon 4 legs or has wings is a friend. 3. No animal shall wear clothes. 4. No animal shall sleep in a bed. 5. No animal shall drink alcohol, shall try to exercise. 6. No animal shall kill any other animal. 7. All animals are equal.
These commandments, they vowed, would be the guiding principles of their new society, a society where no creature would live in servitude, and where every animal would be valued for its own sake. As they read the commandments aloud, the animals felt a deep sense of pride, a shared commitment to the ideals that old Major had inspired. They knew the path ahead would not be easy, but together they would build a life worthy of the dreams they had dared to dream. In the days that followed, the animals worked with a vigor they had never known. Each task, each chore, took on a new significance, for they were working not for Jones, but for themselves and each other. In the quiet moments, they gathered to sing Beasts of England, the melody filling the air with a sense of promise and belonging. Every blade of grass, every handful of feed felt sweeter, more satisfying, as if the farm itself had come alive under their care. Yet as night fell and they looked upon the commandments on the barn wall, a solemnity settled over them. They understood that freedom was fragile, a thing to be guarded with vigilance and loyalty. And though they did not know what challenges lay ahead, they vowed to remain united, to build a society that old Major would have been proud of, a society where, at long last, all animals were truly equal. Life on Animal Farm settled into a rhythm of hard work and cautious hope. The fields stretched wide and golden under the early morning sun, and every creature seemed to feel the breath of freedom filling their lungs. Gone were the oppressive shouts and scornful eyes of Mr. Jones. replaced by a camaraderie that was both exhilarating and exhausting. The animals labored from dawn until dusk, not because they feared the whip, but because they believed in something greater, a shared dream of a society built on the simple yet powerful principle of all animals work, but all animals share equally. Each chore, each task was a step toward a brighter future that they were building with their own hoofs, paws, and claws. Snowball was often the first to rise and the last to rest. The young pig's mind buzzed constantly with ideas, and he threw himself into the work with a fervor that was contagious. He would rally the animals each morning, his voice bright with enthusiasm, as he outlined plans to improve the farm. Snowball was often the first to rise and the last to rest. The young pig's mind buzzed constantly with ideas, and he threw himself into the work with a fervor. He would break the floods and dig out the broken fruit trees.
Imagine it, comrades.
He would say, his eyes shining.
A farm with electricity to ease our labor, heated stables for the winter, lush fields to feed us through every season. We will build it all together.
The animals felt inspired, filled with a sense of purpose that none had ever known. Boxer, the stalwart horse, worked harder than anyone, his strong muscles straining with each heavy load. He took Snowball's vision to heart, repeating the motto he'd adopted, "I will work harder." Each day, he would push himself to the limit, convinced that his efforts were the price of freedom and that every ounce of sweat brought them closer to the world old Major had dreamed of. But for all his dedication to the farm's prosperity, Snowball's position was not without challenge. Napoleon, his fellow pig, was equally committed, but his focus was not on lofty ideals or grand improvements. Napoleon was deliberate, silent, and watchful. While Snowball led rallies and organized projects, Napoleon focused on something else entirely: consolidating power. He kept mostly to himself, working in the background, watching as Snowball led with charisma and vision. In private, Napoleon had begun raising a litter of puppies in a secluded corner of the farm. He told the others only that it was part of his plan for the farm's future security, but few questioned him. It was Napoleon, after all, and he was one of their leaders. Yet, in Napoleon's quiet ambitions, a shadow began to grow on the horizon of Animal Farm's bright future. Even so, the animals toiled happily, unaware of the divisions slowly forming within their ranks. The pigs, naturally intelligent and quick-witted, began to assume more and more responsibility in managing the farm's day-to-day affairs. They coordinated schedules, handled the grain allotments, and made decisions on trade. For many of the animals, this seemed only natural. The pigs were clever, after all, and they often reminded the others that organizing the farm's needs was as crucial as the physical labor itself. Over time, though, some animals began to notice small, puzzling changes. When the apples ripened, they assumed the fruits would be shared among all, as they always had been. But Squealer, a pig known for his persuasive speech and quick smile, announced that the apples and milk would be reserved for the pigs alone.
Comrades,
he explained, adopting a soothing, reasonable tone.
it is for your own good. You see, we pigs are the thinkers, the planners, and it is vital that we remain in good health. If we are weak, who will organize the work? Who will make decisions that ensure the safety and prosperity of Animal Farm? Surely you wouldn't want Mr. Jones to return?
The mere mention of Jones was enough to silence most questions. The animals had lived under his rule, and the scars of that life were still fresh. The pigs were the ones who had led them out of that darkness. Surely they deserved a little extra, didn't they? And so, with murmurs of agreement and a touch of doubt, they accepted Squealer's reasoning. Yet, a quiet unease crept through some of them, a faint whisper in the back of their minds that was difficult to ignore. Clover, the motherly mare, could not shake her feeling of doubt. The pigs had been their leaders, yes, but weren't they all supposed to be equal? She voiced her concerns to Boxer one evening as they grazed by the pasture.
"Isn't it strange, Boxer?"
she asked, her voice soft.
"Didn't we all agree that no animal should have more than any other?"
Boxer, ever loyal and trusting, shook his head.
"I don't know, Clover, but I do know this. If the pigs say it is for our good, then it must be so. They are wiser than us. Besides, we are free now. That is what matters."
He spoke the words with conviction, but even Boxer, in his heart, felt a tiny, uncomfortable stir. Snowball, meanwhile, continued with his ambitious projects. His latest vision was a grand one, a windmill that would provide electricity to the farm. It would be a symbol of their progress, proof that Animal Farm could be self-sustaining and prosperous. He threw himself into the plan, sketching detailed diagrams and rallying the animals with speeches that were equal parts inspiration and instruction. He had won many of them over to the idea, but Napoleon was conspicuously silent on the matter, his dark eyes narrowing every time Snowball spoke of his grand plan. Tension simmered. Snowball's idealism clashed with Napoleon's calculated ambitions, yet neither would openly challenge the other. To the animals, they were a united front, but to those who observed closely, there was an undeniable tension. Napoleon would watch from the sidelines, his gaze piercing and his silence growing more pronounced with each day. In private, he would meet with Squealer and murmur in low tones, casting glances over his shoulder as though he feared they might be overheard. Meanwhile, Squealer continued to address the concerns of the animals, spinning explanations that soothed away doubt. When asked why the pigs needed to live in the farmhouse, or why they took the best portions, Squealer would explain, his voice low and comforting. "Listen, or else you won't be heard. Grunting makes dogs even more nauseous."
Comrades, you must understand. We need our rest, our comforts. The farmhouse is not a luxury, it is a necessity. We need the quiet to think, to plan.
The animals, though uneasy, accepted these justifications. They wanted to believe in the dream they had sacrificed so much for. They told themselves that the pigs were making difficult decisions on behalf of everyone, and if a few extra comforts were needed, then so be it. Days turned into weeks, and the animals found themselves working harder than ever, The fields demanded their strength, and the windmill project demanded their endurance. Yet, the animals took pride in their work, especially Boxer, who would rise even earlier than the others, taking on the heaviest loads without complaint. "I will work harder," he would murmur to himself, his gaze fixed on the distant windmill. It became his mantra, his pledge to the farm that had given him purpose. But cracks were beginning to show. The pigs' leadership roles began to appear more privileged than practical. And while Squealer insisted it was all necessary, the other animals could feel a shift. The sight of Napoleon, Snowball, and Squealer dining alone in the farmhouse with glasses of milk and apples did not sit well with many, even if they remained silent. One evening, after the day's work was done, a hushed conversation passed between some of the animals as they rested in the pasture.
"I don't understand it."
Murmured one of the sheep, her eyes wide with confusion.
"Aren't we all supposed to be equal? Why do the pigs get special treatment?"
Benjamin, the old donkey, who seldom spoke but always listened, let out a quiet, bitter laugh.
"All animals are equal,"
he said, his voice thick with sarcasm.
"but some are more equal than others, it seems."
His words were lost in the wind, but a chill settled over the group. It was a thought they dared not acknowledge, a seed of doubt that was slowly growing in the cracks of their newfound society. As the moon rose over Animal Farm, the animals settled into an uneasy sleep. Their dreams were still full of freedom, but shadows had crept into their hearts. Snowball's projects, Napoleon's puppies, Squealer's explanations, they were all pieces of a puzzle that felt slightly askew. They could feel the change in the air, but they did not yet understand its meaning. The weeks following the rebellion were filled with an exhilaration that none of the animals could have imagined. For the first time in their lives, they were truly masters of their own fate. They worked together in harmony, unburdened by the tyranny that had once weighed on their backs, and each creature felt a stirring pride as they tended to their fields and barns. Every day felt like a step further from the bleak days. Under Mr. Jones, a march toward a brighter and fairer future. Yet, as news of their rebellion spread, a shadow began to creep over the animals' newfound joy. Whispers traveled from farm to farm, tales of animals who had driven out their human masters, tales of the revolution at Animal Farm. The human farmers grew uneasy, their grip on their own animals tightening. These were men who had grown accustomed to ruling with whips and chains, and the thought of animals rising up, of losing control over their livestock, filled them with a fierce and fearful anger. The other animals on the neighboring farms listened to these tales with a strange mix of awe and longing. They would huddle together in quiet corners, eyes wide with wonder, as they spoke of the animals on Animal Farm, creatures just like them who had tasted freedom. Though they were weary from their own labor and shackled by the same grim lives of servitude, something in them stirred, a faint hope, a glimmer, that they too might one day be free. The humans, however, were not willing to risk such an outcome. Mr. Jones, now nursing his resentment and bitterness with a bottle in hand, rallied the neighboring farmers, pleading for help to retake his lost farm. They mocked him at first, laughing at the thought of animals defying their natural place. But as the days passed and the story spread, they too began to feel threatened. Jones, furious and humiliated, gathered his fellow farmers and hatched a plan. He could not bear the thought that the animals who had once served him so obediently were now ruling the farm in his absence. To him, their rebellion was a personal insult that demanded vengeance. One crisp autumn morning, Jones and a small army of men approached Animal Farm, armed with sticks, pitchforks, and even a few guns. They moved with grim determination, ready to reclaim the land and reassert their power. From a distance, the animals spotted the humans marching toward the gate, their faces set in hard, determined lines. A wave of panic swept through the farm, rippling from one tree to another like the chill of an approaching storm. They had known that humans might one day come for them, but seeing them now, their former masters, ready to crush their dreams, filled them with a terror they hadn't felt since the days of their own oppression. Snowball was the first to respond. Seeing the humans approach, he sprang into action, his mind racing as he organized the animals for battle. He called out orders, his voice steady and commanding, his eyes flashing with a fierce, protective fire.
Remember, comrades, this is our farm.
He shouted.
They come to take it from us, but we will not let them. Stand together, fight as one.
The animals trembled, their hearts pounding with fear and excitement. Snowball's courage was contagious, igniting a sense of bravery within them that they had never known. Boxer, the strong, gentle-hearted workhorse, squared his shoulders and planted his hooves firmly in the earth, ready to defend his home with every ounce of strength he possessed. Even the smaller animals, hens, ducks, and sheep, took their places alongside him, their fear overridden by a determination to protect the freedom they had worked so hard to secure. As the humans advanced, Snowball led the animals in a carefully planned defense, dividing them into ranks. The first wave would be led by the geese, who flapped and honked, creating a chaotic distraction to confuse the humans. Then, Snowball ordered the sheep and other smaller animals to dart between the legs of the men, nipping at their ankles, tripping them, and causing enough confusion to disrupt their movements. The humans, frustrated by the flurry of wings and the bites at their ankles, swung their sticks wildly, their shouts filling the air. They had expected the animals to scatter at the sight of them, to cower in fear, not to resist with such unexpected ferocity. Jones and his men began to falter, unsure of how to respond to the animals' coordinated attack, but they pushed forward, their anger flaring as they swung their weapons, determined to regain control. And then Snowball charged, with a cry that was both a rallying call and a declaration of defiance. He launched himself at Jones, his powerful frame barreling into the farmer's legs. Jones staggered backward, nearly losing his balance, his eyes wide with shock. Snowball's bravery was like a beacon to the other animals. They surged forward, attacking with every ounce of strength they possessed. Boxer, with his immense strength and loyalty, became a force of nature. He reared up on his hind legs and struck out with his hooves, his blows landing with a thunderous force. Each strike was a reminder to the humans that they were no longer masters here. But even as he fought, Boxer's gentle heart caused him pain. He fought not out of malice, but out of a fierce love for his comrades, a desire to protect the family he had found among the animals. The battle raged on, a chaotic blur of fur, feathers, and dust. Snowball's strategy was relentless, and the animals fought with a courage they had never known. The sheep, who had once been so timid, now fought with a fierce resolve. The hens pecked and clawed, and the cows charged, their horns lowered in defiance. At one point, Jones raised his gun, aiming it at Snowball. Time seemed to slow as the animals watched, horror flickering in their eyes as the barrel pointed toward their fearless leader. But Snowball, driven by the will to protect his comrades and the dream of a free animal farm, did not flinch. He lunged forward, his heart thundering with defiance. A shot rang out, and Snowball staggered, blood trickling from a wound in his shoulder. The animals gasped, their hearts clenching at the sight of their leader wounded. But Snowball did not falter. Ignoring the pain, he raised his head and let out a rallying cry, a cry that filled every animal with a renewed sense of purpose. They would fight on for Snowball, for Animal Farm, for the dream they had promised to build together. The humans, faced with the animals' unyielding spirit and fierce determination, began to waver. They had come expecting an easy victory, but they found themselves outmatched by the sheer willpower of the animals. Slowly, they retreated, their faces etched with disbelief and humiliation. One by one, they stumbled back toward the gate, their confidence shattered, their pride bruised. When the last of the humans had fled, a hush fell over the battlefield. The animals stood in silence, their breaths coming in gasps, their bodies weary and bruised. Snowball, despite his wound, stood tall, his gaze filled with pride as he looked upon their comrades. They had done the impossible. They had defended their farm, their freedom, their home. In the days that followed, the animals honored those who had fought bravely. Snowball was hailed as a hero, his bravery and sacrifice earning him the admiration of every creature on the farm. A solemn ceremony was held, and the animals awarded medals to those who had distinguished themselves in the battle. Boxer, Snowball, and even the smallest of the hens who had fought were recognized, their names spoken with reverence. They called it the Battle of the Cowshed, a name that would forever mark the day they had fought together, risking everything for the dream of a fair and free animal farm. After the triumph of the Battle of the Cowshed, Animal Farm was awash in hope and pride. The animals, now battle-worn but united, shared a deep sense of accomplishment and loyalty to one another. They had won their independence and felt a renewed resolve to build a farm that honored the dreams they had shared with Old Major. And so they threw themselves back into their work, day after day, driven by the promise of a better life. But as they labored together, side by side, new tensions were quietly brewing beneath the surface. Snowball, the visionary and the farm's most energetic leader, began to speak more passionately about his plans to build a windmill. In Snowball's eyes, the windmill was not just a structure, but a symbol of progress, a beacon that would transform their hard work into something more sustainable, a future where they might finally be free from the endless toil.
With the windmill,
Snowball explained, his voice rich with enthusiasm.
we could generate electricity. Imagine the lights we'd have in the barn, warm stables in winter, and machines that would make our tasks easier. Think of the time we would have to enjoy our freedom to rest and live.
Snowball painted vivid pictures in their minds of warm nights and easier days, of a life where work was balanced with leisure and every animal could reap the rewards of their labor without fear or exhaustion. Boxer's eyes shone with excitement. He had always believed in Snowball's vision, and this dream of a brighter future filled him with even greater determination. Clover, too, felt her heart swell with hope as she imagined her foals and the other young animals living in such a world. However, not all shared Snowball's vision. Napoleon, ever watchful and calculating, viewed the windmill with a suspicion that bordered on contempt. He would sit silently as Snowball spoke of his grand ideas, his face inscrutable, his eyes narrowing as the animals gathered around Snowball with admiration. To Napoleon, the windmill represented a dangerous distraction, something that could undermine his hold on the farm. He was not one to engage in open debates or visionary schemes. He preferred to rule through control and obedience, not inspiration. And as Snowball's popularity grew, so did Napoleon's resentment. Behind closed doors, Napoleon began muttering to Squealer and the other pigs.
Snowball's ideas are nonsense.
He sneered.
Al, this talk of electricity and machines, it's just a distraction, a waste of time and resources. The animals need practical leadership, not these foolish dreams. Snowball is leading them astray.